Welcome back, Mando.
Ho ho! Greetings, Bucketheads. Mavar Tagar. Welcome to our 276th magnificent Mailaroon munching episode of Mandovision. I'm your host, Nargai Tom, and thank you so much for checking out the small independent Star Wars podcast. We're so glad you're here. Reach out to us on the socials. We're at Mando_Vision on Twitter /X and Instagram. Email the show, mandovisiontom@gmail.com. Be sure to like, subscribe, follow, and share this show with all the Mandalorians in your covert. All right, Bucketheads, we're back for another installment in our Star Wars Rebels rewatch series. I'm still getting used to saying that. It feels like we were doing the Clone Wars rewatch for basically forever. In almost the entire run of this podcast has been covering that show. So now that we've transitioned into Rebels, it's taken me a little bit to kind of get used to saying that and used to reading the names of new cast members. But it is what it is, and we're plugging ahead. So we're here for the third episode in the first season of Rebels, and it's an episode that is not rated very highly by the fans who do such things on the internet. It's not maligned by any stretch, but you know, those familiar terms are thrown about when it comes to this episode. It's filler, it's nonsense, you can skip it. One review said it was childish, this episode, but I disagree with many of those assertions because I think this is a really solid episode for some character building, some character development, and seeing how two characters who have been mostly at odds since they came together on the show, Zeb and Ezra, begin to sort of forge their brotherly dynamic. And it's a good episode in that sense because it's these two characters who are so different, yet very, very similar in many, many regards, being thrown together by Hera and getting themselves into a bit of a situation, a bit of a pickle, if you will, and them having to get out of it, and again, learning a little bit about each other in the process. So I think it's a rock solid episode. I like the dynamic between Zeb, and it's amusing to me, those that watch the episode and see how Chopper's antagonism towards both of them really sort of spurs most of the conflict between the two characters. So that's again, you get a little bit more of that glimpse of Chopper's antagonistic personality in this episode as well. So again, I think it's a pretty solid one, and we're going to talk a little bit more about it right after the jump here. But let's go ahead and get our episode particulars out of the way. This is Star Wars Rebels, Episode 4, Fight or Flight, which I love the name. Fighter, like fighter, TIE fighter, and flight, all right? Like flight, but it sounds like fight or flight. That amuses me. And because it does have a double meaning for this episode, because Ezra and Zeb have to choose whether they are going to fight or take off and avoid the conflict after they've stolen a TIE fighter and already gotten themselves into a significant amount of trouble. Let's go ahead. Our writer for this week's episode, Kevin Hops, once again, and directed by Stephen G. Lee. Our primary cast for this week's episode, Taylor Gray as Ezra Bridger, Vanessa Marshall as Hera Syndulla, Freddie Prinze Jr. as Kanan Jarrus, Tia Sakar as Sabine Wren, Steve Blum is Zeb Aurelios, Dave Filoni as Chopper. We got David Shaughnessy as Vendor Number 1, an Imperial transport driver. Liam O'Brien is the supply master Yogar Leist. He's also Morad Sumnar. And Greg Ellis is Baron Valen Rudor. And we mentioned some names there, some familiar as more voice actors from the Star Wars universe crossover, like Liam O'Brien. What I want to say about the voice cast in this one, nothing new. I'm going to leave it alone for right now. Our plot for this week, though, to prevent Ezra and Zeb from bickering, Hera sends them on a supply run. En route back to the Ghost, they encounter Morad Sumner, a friend of Ezra's parents. And that's a very vague description yet again, but that's okay because we're going to talk a little bit more about it on the other side of the jump. So you know what that means, friends. It is time. Strap on your buckets. Let's go.
Get out of here. We'll hold them off. You're going to have to relocate the covert. This is the way. This is the way.
So I very much like how this episode opens with Ezra trying to use the Force, trying to practice and hone his Force abilities, sitting in the galley, attempting to levitate his bowl. And just when you think he's doing it, turns out it's actually Chopper using one of his little retractable limbs to pick up the bowl and throw Ezra off. Again, for this episode, the first of the antagonism from Chopper. This sends Ezra into a bit of a rage, chasing after Chopper through the halls of the Ghost. When Ezra spies Sabine painting in her quarters, and the sort of, I don't know. I was never a big fan of the way that Ezra flirts or tries to flirt with Sabine in these early episodes in particular. It's awkward and clumsy, though I do like how Sabine just plays it no mind, hardly at all. But it's another attempt by Ezra to gain her favor in a sense. Before going back to his main task, which was pursuing Chopper, who has gone into his quarters. And Zeb's in there because they are bunkmates. They share a chamber together. And again, Chopper antagonizes them. Electroshocks wake up Zeb. and the whole episode is basically Chopper's fault. Let's be perfectly honest. And then the prank that Chopper has pulled on them by removing the bolts from the bunk so that when Ezra jumps on it, it falls directly onto Zeb. Thus, Zeb being angry at Ezra, chasing Ezra into the cargo hold, which attracts the attention of Hera and Kanan. And Hera has had just about enough of these two and their nonstop bickering and arguing with each other, and sends them on a supply run now that they are back on Lothal. And she gives them one of those sort of impossible tasks, right? She asks for a fruit, the Meiloorun fruit, that apparently does not grow here on Lothal. But that's not really a big sticking point of this episode, because they find out very quickly that information, but they also find out that the Empire has somehow acquired this fruit, and it sort of spurs our characters on, right? Like, when they go to town, we meet an old friend of Ezra's parents, so another sort of glimpse into Ezra's background, just a tiny, tiny bit, as we meet Sumner. And this sets the stage for what's to happen later in the episode. But the Sumner stuff is important because, like I said, it does set the stage. So I should mention that the Imperial Supply Officer makes mention of Sumner selling the Empire his farm. And he replies that, nope, that's not going to be happening. And the Imperial Officer just sort of laughs it off, like, okay, well, you had your chance there, old man. And you know, we as the audience know that the Empire doesn't really take no for an answer. So I think I'm saying more room, but it's Morad. I can't even read my own handwriting. Sorry, friends. So yeah, Morad and this supply master, Yogar Leist, get into it. We overhear that. We know this is going to come back later in the episode, and of course it does. But we also find out that the supply master has secured this Meiloorun fruit. Now, Zeb has gone around and gotten the rest of the supplies they need. But they won't have them for much longer because Ezra's going to decide that they're going to get this Malaroon fruit. They're going to get this item that Hera had given them as an impossible task, and sort of like, prove her wrong. That like they can do it. They can get all these things done. Yeah, they can't be given sent on wild goose chases and things like that. No, no, no. So they're going to steal it from the Empire. Well, it seems to go a little, well enough initially, but Ezra's got a bit of an arrogant streak in him. So he is caught, he is detected, and Zeb has to save him. Now, it's at this point that one of the reasons why Ezra and Zeb are at each other's throats is because after last week's episode, it sounds like Ezra has not stopped reminding Zeb how Ezra saved his life by using the Force and doing that Force push on Callus, right? And now he just rubs Zeb's face in it a lot, and I could see why Zeb would be so angry and would be sick of that. So one of the sort of back and forths in this episode is Zeb trying to even up the score here, make it so that he has saved Ezra so that he can stop having this thrown in his face forever and ever and ever. And now eventually it's going to happen because through the course of their interactions here with the Empire, Zeb's going to steal a TIE fighter. And it's fun. I think it's fun that they steal a TIE fighter from this Imperial force out on the rim of the galaxy. Is it maybe a little silly? Is it sure, why not? Whatever. It's also shows Zeb as a capable character, as someone who can get things done and do things. All right. And then he saves Ezra, right? They fly off in their TIE fighter, they evade the Imperial forces, and then they make the difficult call to Kanan and be like, hey, guess what? We stole a TIE fighter. And I do think it's funny how both Zeb and Ezra are sort of reluctant to just give away the TIE fighter, to just crash it somewhere and walk away. They feel really proud of themselves for having stolen this Imperial fighter and gotten away with it, though they hadn't even disabled the tracking device on the ship, which comes as something of a surprise to both of them when Kanan asks if that was the first thing they did or not. So eventually, through the course of the episode, as they are preparing to rendezvous back up with the Ghost and ditch the TIE fighter, they see smoke in the distance, and of course it is the farm of Sumner that we talked about. Has now been taken aggressively by the Empire. And what's neat about this scene is this is actually the first time that we saw it. I gotta choose my words a little carefully here, but the Imperial troop transport that was brought to real life in The Mandalorian was brought into continuity first here in this episode of the show in animated form. So it's exciting to see that, something that was designed as a toy by Kenner back in the late 70s, I believe around the time of the first Star Wars movie, around the time of A New Hope, as like one of the first vehicles that wasn't specifically from the films. So incorporated here for the first time in animated form, later to be adapted in real life for The Mandalorian. But we get to see it, and it's kind of fun, and it's kind of cool, and it's very retro and vintage, and I dig all of it. So this leads to basically like a prison break, right? Because Sumner and his family have been taken by the Empire, and now Ezra is going to free them. And again, it's just a kind of a fun little episode as our characters learn to fly the TIE, learn how to do the things they need to do to rescue this family and do the right thing. Again, proving that their rebelness, if you will. It's a fun episode, and they're independent of Hera and Kanan. They're doing this on their own. They're learning how to work together. That's why I think this episode's so effective, because the show is called Rebels, so they're going to be fighting the Empire, but we have to see how they can all learn to fight as a unit, right? As sort of uh, a freedom fighter group should, right? Like y'all gotta. It's still a team. You gotta be able to work together. And Zeb and Ezra as the newest member, has got the most to learn about how to work within the framework of a team. Now it's more complicated. It's more complicated, more complex, because this team also has a very strong family dynamic. And obviously, Zeb and Ezra are like the squabbling siblings. They're like brothers. And obviously, Hera and Kanan are more like the parents, excuse me, the mother and the father. And Sabine is sort of like the perfect child, I would imagine, in this scenario. So they have to get their stuff together. They have to get their situation sort of figured out. And that's what a lot of this episode is. It's like, yeah, there'll still be times when Ezra and Zeb get on each other's nerves and push each other's buttons, but that's going to be their sort of dynamic. But they have to learn how to and push each other's buttons, antagonize each other a little bit, but still have the ability to work together to achieve the goals of their team. And that's why this episode works for me. This is why this episode is so solid. And again, it all comes together. It all works out. My recollections of this episode are of this first season are a little fuzzy. They tell Kanan that they destroyed the TIE fighter, but we never see them do it. So I suspect that we see the TIE fighter again later in this season, or maybe in another season of the show. I don't remember for sure, so I could be wrong on that. But again, they're sort of like laying some foundation, some track here. Um, but and again, I do think this episode is important because next week's episode, we start getting into the thick of what this first season, is focusing on, which is the Inquisitors, and the idea that after all these years, there is another potential Jedi out there running around, and the Inquisitors will now come hunting for Kanan and for Ezra. That's where we go next. So we have to get that sort of team dynamic established, know that they can work together, and become like the rebels that exist in the title of the show. All right. And that's why I think this episode is a solid 8 buckets. It's maybe 7.5 if I really wanted to like ding it a little bit, because, well, there is no because. I just like the episode. I think it's really a fun one. You can get 8 buckets and not have to be the most serious episode of Star Wars TV ever. I enjoy it. I think the animation is still a little rough, but I enjoy the elements of the familiar original trilogy music that we get in these episodes. And again, I like these early stages of seeing how this team kind of comes together and learns to work together. And again, team, but also a family. And that dynamic is a really strong element of the show that will get explored throughout its run. But we're in those early stages now and seeing where Ezra fits in all of this. So I like this episode. I think it's really, really solid. It's one you could easily overlook, but I think that's a mistake. I think these episodes where you see the bonding, where you see the sort of forging of the bonds between these characters is important, especially for Ezra as the newest member of the team, of the family. All right, friends, that's it. That's a short one for us, but that's okay. That's okay. Well, there's always more episodes later, all right? Reach out to us. Give us a follow on the socials at Mando_Vision, Twitter/X and Instagram. Email this show, mandovisiontom@gmail.com. Be sure to like, subscribe, follow, and share the show with all the Mandalorians in your covert. Remember, this is the Mandovision Podcast. I am your host, Nargai Tom. Thank you once again for checking out our show. We appreciate you being here. If you're a member of Buckethead Nation, you are the best. You are the most amazing, supportive group of Star Wars fans out there. And I strongly encourage you all to continue to be amazing and great Star Wars fans. Go out there, engage with the community, engage with our peers in a positive, respectful manner, and make more Star Wars fans. That's the best thing we can do to ensure the traditions and beliefs of our series continue for a long, long time. And mostly just to like root out the trolls and root out the toxicity, right? We are going to be positive. We are not going to live in the muck. We are not going to tear down the things that we love. It's just not going to happen. Again, you can not like something, still show it some modicum of respect. And with that, Bucketheads, we're going to get out of here. We'll be back next week. So take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and remember, this podcast can only end one way. This is the way.
This is the way.
This is the way. This is the way.